How I Gutted My HOA, posted by ChillDude890. This is the story of how I completely changed out my community's HOA board and foreclosed on one of their houses after they disrespected me. I got fined for ridiculous things by my HOA, and I got ticked off and decided to get on the board. I then spent a year removing all members of the board I joined and replacing them with people that were pro-small HOA. I have then since helped reduce policies and tried to make the community better for everyone. Let me give you the backstory. A few years ago, I bought my first house in a medium-size, or 500 to 1,000 homes, neighborhood in a southern state. It had an HOA, but I actually picked the neighborhood because they had the lowest HOA dues in the city, the fewest rules, and the house was by far the nicest one that I could afford in my budget. After a few weeks, I got a violation notice from the HOA telling me that I had 2 violations needing correction. The first, my lawn was not green enough, and the second, the trash cans were too close to my driveway. I was thoroughly confused about number 1, as it was February in the middle of winter, so of course my lawn was dead like pretty much everyone else's, so I had assumed that either this was a mistake or an existing offense from the previous owner. As for the trash cans, I kept them on the side of my house, and I think when the HOA came by, my trash can stuck out past the side wall 1 foot, so how dare I? I shrugged them off and continued on. Come March, I got another notice, this time fining me for both violations. Each one cost me $100, and they wanted the money in 2 weeks. I was ticked. This made no sense, and I was not about to let them just try and get money for BS violations, so I called the management company that worked with the board to get them appealed. The lady told me that I needed to appeal directly to the board and that I could do so in the next annual meeting in a few days. So I, of course, showed up to the meeting. Prior to it starting, I met with a few homeowners and learned they were all there for the similar BS violations and were ticked off too. I then talked with one of the members of the board about the fine appeals process. He was an older guy in his 70s with short gray hair and a very worn and angry face. He asked what I was getting fined for, and when I told him, he just looked at me and said, "And you should get fined for that? Young people like you not taking care of their homes is the whole reason I got on this board. Learn to be a better property owner." This dude was the VP of a volunteer board telling me that I did not know how to take care of my house? What a sad life. The meeting then started, and the moderator mentioned that since this was an annual meeting, we would be voting on 3 of 5 board members. They had some applicants to the board, and we could also nominate someone today. That's when I had the idea of how I could get my revenge. When the election part of the meeting came, I nominated myself. I gave some BS speech about HOAs are not here to make money, and I just wanted to serve my community. I won in a landslide, and you could see the board members getting annoyed because they had scowled during my speech. After the meeting, I appealed my violations in a very elegant way, and they agreed to waive my trash can violation. As for the grass one, apparently since I had weeds growing in my yard, like a tiny patch in the corner, they were still fining me because the weeds were turning yellow after I sprayed them. I was dumbfounded how they could get away with this, but they used a technicality in the bylaws that I had signed, so I ended up losing $100. Revenge. I will be honest, I had not expected this to work. After joining the board of 5, including myself, I was appointed secretary and had to help maintain meeting notes and review records. They specifically told me that I was not allowed to propose new policies, but I could vote on new ones proposed by the VP or the president, which I later learned was actually a violation of their own rules. I voted every new rule down as long as I was in that position. I decided that my best course of action was to listen to how the others operated and look for an opening to get each of them off the board. The first opening came when the president, who literally looked like the most Karen woman ever, mentioned that she had wanted to fine for flowers that were not neutral color. Basically, if a homeowner wanted to add something like turquoise flowers, we would fine them. She apparently had a neighbor that had flowers that she didn't like, and she wanted to use the board to stop them. It was pretty insane. I then started my revenge on her. I started a message thread on Slack, since that's how we communicated, with the other board members and asked what they had thought about her policy and the reasoning. After far too much deliberation, and 2 of them honestly thought that this was okay, we agreed that the policy went too far. I then made a long post in the main channel telling her that her actions were not only wrong, but that she should be excused from the board. When she inevitably flipped out, I called a board meeting in the following week, and the other 4 board members voted her off for targeting a community member for personal gain. She gave a sob story about how the board was her life and that the neighborhood was like her child, but I didn't care. That was 1 down. I convinced one of my good neighbor friends to join a little later on to take her spot. The next members I targeted were the treasurer and director, as I wanted to save the VP for last. They were actually pretty easy to get off the board. They were very easily swayed by public opinion. So I made a fake account on Nextdoor and waited until spring when most of the violations go out. And when the letters went out, I looked for angry posts on Nextdoor. I then would comment on each one of them, giving the first names of the 2 board members as the culprits, and told them to come to the next HOA meeting to appeal. It worked far better than I had expected. During the next meeting, over 50 people showed up and called out those by name. It was glorious. During the open session, community members grilled those 2 for their poor policies, even though they did not make most of them. The VP, now president after the other one resigned, tried to defend them, but ultimately failed. The 2 members were so distraught after the meeting, and I told them that maybe they should resign, and they both did. That was 2 more down, both of which were replaced by a couple who came to the same meeting and wanted to get rid of those rules. Finally, the board had been flipped to 4 out of 5 people wanting to get rid of all these dumb rules. The president, however, was still the same old angry, hateful man. He tried to add more rules to increase violation revenue, and we voted him down every time. He started to get annoyed, but stayed steadfast to the board. I tried a lot of tactics to get him to leave, and not much swayed him. A few months went by, and we started with a new management company. They had a much better style of property management and a website for looking through our community's records, as well as automated reports. When we got our first fines report, I hit pay dirt. The president's house appeared, and he owed around $10,000. Apparently, he had some open violations that he had never paid, and the other management company hid it from the board for him, since he had been on the board for close to 7 years. So I looked into remedies. Since his fines were over $3,000, our bylaws stated that a majority vote of the board could start an HOA foreclosure on the home, which I think is insane that HOAs can do that. So I got all the docs together and double-checked with the new management company that the fines were correct, which they confirmed. I called an emergency board session, presented the information, and 4 of the 5 of us voted to start the foreclosure process. The president got angry, cursed, and left the meeting early. We were informed a few days later that the president had resigned, paid his fine, and put his house up for sale. While I am sad that we couldn't force a foreclosure, at least he was off the board. I am currently president to this day, and I have reduced the fining policy to be a maximum of $400, and homeowners can appeal anytime they wish digitally. In addition, I have banned any grass fines until May, and trash can violations have been super relaxed. Moral of the story? never fine me $200, call me a stupid young kid, and expect to not lose your house. While we're on the subject of homeowners associations, here's the story of how my parents' HOA tried to use a 40-year-old rule to stop them from repairing hurricane damage and got the shaft for their trouble, posted by Deleted. A few months back, as you all may remember, Florida got pretty beaten up by a couple of hurricanes. My folks live down there, and while none of the damage that they sustained was life-alteringly horrible or home-destroying, homeowners insurance kicked in and they had some water damage through the roof. They also needed a new one because of all the shingles that had come off and the debris that had punctured it. My folks looked through roofing options and determined that a metal roof would be a great option to reduce damage and maintenance on their home. Plus, it would serve as a more energy-efficient option with passive solar collection and fewer thermal losses in the summer and winter. It is more expensive, but my dad was basically r/personal finance incarnate when I was growing up, and he's in his 60s and he's finally concluded that he has FU money so long as that community is concerned, so the roof was a good investment. It looked like a win-win-win with that roof. Then they reviewed the HOA and saw that, as of 1989, metal roofs are prohibited in the neighborhood, subject to fines and mandatory removal. Reviewing the bylaw further showed that it was clearly referring to older, crappier tin roofs, not a proper metal one like today's market provides, which looks great and has all of those other benefits. My folks wanted to play by the rules though, and called up the HOA to explain the situation. HOA was friendly and said that they would be looking into that bylaw and that my folks weren't the only ones who requested that they be allowed to have a metal roof. My parents couldn't get a roofing contractor in a few months anyway. There was too much demand since everyone else's roof got wrecked, so they waited a few weeks and got nothing new out of the HOA. Tried again a few weeks later. Nothing. After about 2 months of this, they said screw it and started construction on the metal roof. Popular opinion in the neighborhood was on their side, and the roof was covered with a tarp that wouldn't last forever. The new roof got installed over the course of a few days, and then we found out the HOA's crappiness. The neighborhood has a nice brick sign out front that says, "Welcome to Neighborhood Name." It's very classy, very nice, and was very damaged in a hurricane. The HOA was strapped for money due to other repairs and dues, and some prick had the bright idea to impose as many fines as they could on the neighborhood to pay for these repairs, starting with my folks. They served my folks with a letter claiming that they were in violation of the HOA and demanded a $25,000 fine and that they remove it, which is, of course, absurd. My poor mother is very much a play-by-the-rules sort, and she was worried sick. Dad's ex-Navy and a contract negotiator. He essentially checked his 60-year-old knuckles and said, "Oh, you little jerks want to play, do ya?" So they set about researching and making some calls. Poor mom kept waking up at 1 a.m., unable to sleep, and I felt terrible for her as she went through this. But then they had a breakthrough. A few weeks after being served, I'm fuzzy on the timeline since I don't live in Florida, it may have been less, there was essentially a burn them at the stake meeting of the HOA, where my parents could defend themselves for an absurdly short amount of time, and the HOA could rip into them for daring to defy their wrath. So my mom, because she's more social and has a better temper than Dad, she comes up to speak and lets the HOA know that they can't do this. HOA smirks and says, they sure can. They have a 40-year-old statute saying that they can. Mom says, you do, but I have state law on my side which supersedes your statute. Turns out there's a law in Florida stating that an HOA, or well, really any regulation, cannot be used to prevent an eco-friendly improvement from taking place on anyone's private property. And wouldn't you know it, the passive solar system of the metal roof counts as an eco-friendly improvement. Turns out, the roofing contractors have dealt with similar stuff before. When Dad mentioned what was going on to them, the contracting officer pulled out a few letters of accreditation and a few past cases where the court had determined that their product was eco-friendly and forced the HOA to pay all legal fees. My mom produced all of this for the crappy HOA, who had to admit that this was, in fact, ironclad. Strapped for money as they were, they couldn't afford to pay a lawyer. HOA head growls, "Is that all?" Mom turns up the sweetness to 11. No, I see in the bylaws that we can vote to impeach the board members at any HOA meeting and to elect their replacements. I move to impeach all of you. I nominate my husband," and she rattles off a list of names, and HOA is stunned. While Dad looked into the legal, Mom looked into the new neighborhood. Popular opinion was on their side, and the hearing was public for the neighborhood. Mom convinced a majority of the homeowners to attend and remove the board for their crappy policy. With that, my parents are now on the all-new board, and Dad is putting his contract negotiation skills and own craftsmanship skills to work repairing the front entrance. And metal roofs are now allowed by the all-new HOA. HOA wants to demolish improvement made to my property, posted by Deleted. I live in a small condo building, 34 units, and have served as vice president on the board previously. When I was on the board, all architectural improvements required board approval. The new HOA president lives 2 units down from me. 2 months ago, I discussed with him the improvements that I was planning on making to my unit so that we could make sure that they would get approved. We planned on replacing some tile with hardwood flooring, redoing the fireplace, and putting tile on the balcony outside. The president said he just needed an architectural change request for the hardwood flooring, as it was the only change that requires board approval, so we put it in and we received approval. The president stopped by numerous times while the work was being commenced, commenting on how nice everything was looking and how the work we were doing to the balcony addresses a problem that some of the balconies have, cracks in them. Fast forward to this month. The HOA received a settlement against the builder's insurance for $1 million and decided to spend it on fixing up the building, replacing roof, repainting, addressing cracks in the stucco, etc. Part of these changes is doing work on the balconies to address cracks in the slabs. In a meeting with the construction company hired to do the repair, the company stated that they will be demolishing any tile put on balconies as part of the work that they're doing. I talked to the HOA president after the meeting, and he told me that he doesn't remember saying that I didn't need an architectural change request for the balcony tile and its exclusive use common property. It's literally been 2 months since I spent over $3,000 to put tile on my balcony, and I'm ticked. He saw the work being done, never once said, "Hey, you need to get this approved," nor did the HOA ever send me a letter. He even commented on how nice the tile was. There isn't anything wrong with my balcony, it looks great and it's structurally sound. The company doing work on the building is putting up the scaffolding, and I'm worried that they're just going to come in and jackhammer the balcony tile while I'm gone at work. My understanding is that the exclusive use common property thing gets thrown around a lot when HOAs don't want to pay for repairs to things like pipes and so on. Why am I being forced to undergo a repair that my unit doesn't need that's going to cost both the HOA and me money? I'm getting a copy of my CC&Rs today, but I would like to understand what my options are in terms of at least getting the HOA management company and the construction company notified that I want to put this in arbitration and for them to not demolish the tile until a decision is made whether they are authorized to do so or required to put the balcony back in its previous state. I don't understand why I simply can't sign an agreement stating that I will pay for any needed repairs to my balcony when it needs them versus destroy an improvement to do an inferior form of cosmetic improvement. Oh, do you agree with this commenter? So you started work on an outside balcony in a condo complex without first reading your CC&Rs? I think you'll likely find that you'll be getting an expensive lesson in condo ownership. Do you agree with that or not? Let me know. HOA secrets exposed, tax evasion, fraud, and extortion, how I uncovered it. Find out how by clicking on the video on the screen. You don't want to miss this story, and I will see you there.